The Night That Changed Everything, a doctor's terrifying journey into the Amazon's dark secret. Picture this. You're a brilliant doctor, respected by your peers, trusted by countless families. You've dedicated your life to healing others. But what if I told you that one single night of ignoring ancient wisdom could turn you from healer to patient? Fighting for your very survival against creatures literally eating you alive from the inside out. This isn't science fiction. This isn't a horror movie. This is the true story of Dr. Ashley Collins, and what happened to her will make you question everything you think you know about medicine, wisdom, and the terrifying power of nature's revenge. It started at exactly 3:01 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Boston. Ashley jolted awake, her heart pounding, sweat beading on her forehead. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She could feel it, a subtle, horrifying sensation beneath her scalp, like something was moving under her skin. Her trembling fingers found the spot behind her right ear. There it was, a swollen lump that definitely hadn't been there when she went to sleep. The moment she touched it, lightning-sharp pain shot through her skull, forcing a gasp from her lungs. "No, no, no," she whispered, stumbling toward her bathroom mirror. With unsteady hands, she parted her blonde hair under the harsh fluorescent light. What she saw made her blood run cold. The swollen area wasn't just sitting there. It was pulsing. Not with her heartbeat, with its own rhythm. Something was alive in there. Then she saw it. A tiny droplet of blood appeared at the center of the lump. All her medical training, all her years of experience, evaporated in an instant. Pure, primal terror took over. As she reached for her phone, memories came flooding back. The old indigenous woman in the Amazon, gripping her wrist with surprising strength, her dark eyes intense and knowing. "The forest gives back what it takes, Doctor. Remember that." Ashley's legs buckled as another surge of white-hot pain exploded behind her eyes. Her phone clattered to the tile floor as darkness closed in around her. But let me back up. Let me tell you how we got here, because this story isn't just about parasites and medical mysteries. It's about pride, loss, redemption, and the dangerous consequences of ignoring wisdom that's been passed down for thousands of years. Dr. Ashley Collins had built her reputation at one of Boston's most prestigious children's hospitals through a combination of brilliant diagnostic skills and genuine compassion that set her apart from her colleagues. At 35, her career trajectory had been nothing short of meteoric. She was the doctor other doctors came to when they couldn't figure out what was wrong with a patient. Until Emma Rodriguez arrived. The 7-year-old had been brought in with symptoms that stumped the entire medical team. Fever, neurological issues, strange skin lesions. Nothing fit the typical patterns Ashley had seen before. Despite her relentless efforts, despite working around the clock, despite consulting with specialists across the country, the little girl succumbed to what was later identified as a rare tropical parasitic infection. The guilt was crushing. Had Ashley recognized it sooner, Emma might have survived. The weight of that failure hollowed her out from the inside. She stopped sleeping, lost weight, and started making small mistakes that, in her profession, could prove fatal. When the hospital board suggested a sabbatical, Ashley initially resisted. She was a healer. She belonged in the hospital, saving lives, not running away from her problems. But her closest colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, sat her down for a conversation that would change everything. "You need to heal yourself before you can heal others, Ash," Sarah said while helping pack up Ashley's office. "This isn't giving up. It's regrouping." That conversation planted a seed. If conventional medicine had failed Emma, perhaps there were answers elsewhere. Ashley's research led her to the Amazon basin, where indigenous communities had developed treatments for tropical diseases over thousands of years. She told herself it was purely academic interest when she joined a small research expedition documenting traditional medicine practices. The truth was more desperate. She was searching for redemption. What made the journey more complicated was her strained relationship with her father, Dr. Robert Collins. Once a celebrated infectious disease specialist, he had abandoned Ashley and her mother when Ashley was 12, disappearing into remote regions of the world for his research. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had always defined herself in opposition to him, staying rooted in one community, building lasting relationships with patients, being present in ways he never was. Yet now, broken by failure, she found herself following a similar path. The recognition of this parallel infuriated her almost as much as her failure to save Emma. But the Amazon expedition promised new knowledge, fresh perspective, and perhaps a path back to the physician she once was. What Ashley never anticipated was that the rainforest would mark her in ways far more permanent and terrifying than emotional scars. The expedition had started with such promise. Ashley still remembered the humid embrace of the Amazon air as she stepped off the small charter plane, the way it clung to her skin like a living entity. Their group consisted of 3 researchers, a local guide named Miguel, and Ashley. They spent the first week traveling between villages along the river, documenting medicinal plants and traditional healing practices. The work was fascinating, even if Ashley maintained the skeptical distance of a Western physician. "You must understand," Miguel explained as their boat navigated the winding waterways, "the people here don't separate medicine from spirit. To them, healing the body without addressing the soul is meaningless." Ashley nodded politely. She was there to find practical applications, tangible remedies she could bring back to Boston. The spiritual components were anthropological curiosities, nothing more. That changed when they reached the Wani tribe and met Isabella Vasquez, an elderly healer whose weathered face carried the dignified wisdom of someone intimately acquainted with life and death. Despite her traditional role, Isabella had received some formal education years ago and spoke excellent English, bridging the worlds Ashley was trying to navigate. "You carry a weight," Isabella said upon meeting Ashley, her dark eyes seeming to peer through flesh to bone. "A child's spirit walks with you." The accuracy of Isabella's observation unnerved Ashley. She hadn't mentioned Emma to anyone on the expedition. For 3 days, Ashley shadowed Isabella, documenting treatments for infections, fevers, and parasitic diseases. The healer used combinations of plants that, to Ashley's surprise, contained compounds similar to those in modern pharmaceuticals. But Isabella insisted the preparation rituals were as important as the ingredients. "Respect," Isabella repeated often. "Medicine without respect is just poison in a different form." On their final night with the Wani, the tribe held a ceremony to honor their visitors. The night was thick with smoke from sacred herbs and alive with rhythmic drumming. Ashley, exhausted from the day's hike, found what seemed like the perfect spot to set up her hammock, a small clearing near the edge of the village where the breeze offered relief from the oppressive heat. As she prepared for sleep, Isabella approached with concern etched on her face. "Not here," she warned, gesturing to the trees overhead. "The night spirits are strong in this place. They enter dreams and take what isn't offered." Ashley smiled, thanking Isabella for her concern but insisting she'd be fine. The old woman shook her head and pressed a small pouch of herbs into Ashley's hand. "Keep this close, and do not remove the netting, no matter how hot the night becomes." But the night had become unbearably hot. Around midnight, drenched in sweat and frustrated by the mosquitoes that somehow found their way under the netting despite her precautions, Ashley made the fateful decision to remove it. The relief was immediate. The cool breeze felt like a blessing against her skin. She drifted to sleep with the distant sounds of the ceremony still pulsing through the darkness. She never felt the botfly that landed on her scalp. Never noticed the eggs it deposited near the hairline behind her right ear. Back in Boston, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Ashley returned to work part-time, consulting on cases while she readjusted. The itching began 3 days after her return, a minor irritation she attributed to the change in climate or perhaps a reaction to the new shampoo she'd purchased. A week later, the spot had become tender, slightly raised. Ashley examined it in her bathroom mirror, noting mild inflammation but no visible bite mark or rash. She applied an over-the-counter hydrocortisone cream and dismissed it. There was too much work to catch up on, too many colleagues asking about her exotic vacation with thinly veiled skepticism about its professional value. The pain started gradually, an occasional sharp sensation that would flare and then subside. She took ibuprofen and continued her routine. That's when the nightmares began. Vivid dreams of insects crawling beneath her skin, of Emma Rodriguez standing in her bedroom, pointing silently at Ashley's head. She woke exhausted, increasingly irritable. Colleagues noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way she would occasionally wince and touch the side of her head during consultations. "You should get that checked out," Dr. Chen suggested after watching Ashley discreetly swallow 4 ibuprofen during a case review. "It's just a stress headache," Ashley replied. "Or maybe a mild infection from the trip. I'm taking antibiotics." She wasn't, but the lie came easily. The last thing Ashley wanted was to appear compromised, especially when she was still fighting to prove she was fit to return to full duties. The morning she felt the first distinct movement beneath her skin, Ashley was reviewing Emma's case file, a ritual of self-punishment she engaged in weekly. The sensation was so unexpected, so alien, that she dropped the tablet she was holding. It clattered to the floor as she pressed her fingers against the now considerably swollen area. Nothing. No movement. Had she imagined it? That night, examining the spot more carefully, Ashley noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible hole in the center of the swelling. Like a pore, but perfectly round. Something about that precise circularity triggered an alarm in her medical mind, a distant memory from a tropical medicine textbook. But exhaustion clouded her thinking, and she dismissed the concern. Just an infected insect bite, she told her reflection, applying more antibiotic cream. Nothing serious. 3 days later, she would collapse on her bathroom floor at 3:01 a.m., remembering those words with bitter regret. Now, back to that terrifying night. After coming to on her bathroom floor, Ashley managed to call her closest colleague. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived within an hour, finding Ashley sitting rigidly in her kitchen, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her blouse. "I know how this sounds, Sarah," Ashley said, her voice lower than usual, "but there's something moving under my skin. I can feel it." Dr. Chen's face remained professionally neutral as she gently parted Ashley's hair to examine the swollen area. "How long has this been happening?" "The itching started about 10 days after I got back. The pain and swelling maybe 5 days ago." Ashley winced as Sarah's fingers probed the tender spot. "The movement. That just started yesterday." Sarah made a non-committal sound and continued her examination, her brow furrowing slightly. "I don't see any obvious signs of parasitic infection. The swelling is consistent with a localized inflammatory response, possibly an infected follicle or sebaceous cyst." "It's not a cyst," Ashley insisted, her doctor's composure slipping. "Sarah, I know what I felt." Dr. Chen pulled back, her expression softening into one Ashley recognized immediately, the sympathetic look reserved for patients whose symptoms were suspected to be psychosomatic. "Ashley, you've been through an incredible amount of stress. The loss of Emma, the pressure to perform, the isolation of your trip." Sarah leaned forward with concern in her eyes. The mind processes trauma in strange ways. Sometimes physical manifestations of psychological distress are common, especially among medical professionals who don't allow themselves to properly grieve. "Don't psychoanalyze me," Ashley cut in, heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm not imagining this." Sarah sighed, reaching for her prescription pad. "I'm not saying you're imagining the pain or the sensation, those are real. But the interpretation that something is literally moving under your skin might be your brain's way of processing something else." She scribbled on the pad. "I'm prescribing a mild anxiolytic and referring you to Dr. Martinez for a follow-up." Ashley stared at the prescription being extended toward her. Dr. Martinez was the hospital staff psychiatrist. "You think I'm having some kind of breakdown," she said flatly. "I think you're a brilliant doctor who's been through hell and is still processing it," Sarah countered gently. "Take the medication, get some rest, and see Dr. Martinez. If the physical symptoms persist, we'll run more tests." Ashley took the prescription with numb fingers, knowing argument was futile. In Sarah's position, she might have reached the same conclusion. The diagnosis fit neatly. Overworked physician returns from stress leave, presents with unusual symptoms that coincidentally mirror the tropical disease that took her patient. Classic manifestation of unresolved guilt. Except it wasn't in her head. 3 days later, the pain had become nearly unbearable. The anxiolytics dulled Ashley's reactions but did nothing for the searing jolts that radiated from the swollen area whenever the thing inside moved. And it was moving more frequently now, especially at night. After a particularly excruciating episode left her vomiting from pain, Ashley made an emergency appointment with Dr. Marcus Thompson, the head of infectious disease at Massachusetts General Hospital. She had never met him personally, but knew his reputation. More importantly, he wasn't connected to her professionally or personally, which meant no preconceptions about her mental state. Thompson was older than she expected, perhaps in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent significant time in harsh conditions. His office walls were adorned with photos from various parts of the world: clinical settings in Africa, research stations in South America, refugee camps in Southeast Asia. "Dr. Collins," he greeted her, his voice carrying a slight accent from his years abroad. "I've read your file. Impressive career." "Thank you for seeing me on short notice," Ashley replied, too exhausted for professional pleasantries. "I need someone to take a proper look at this." She turned her head, showing the now egg-sized swelling. Dr. Thompson pulled on gloves and examined the area with methodical precision, his expression unreadable. "When did you first notice the central aperture?" Ashley blinked, surprised by the specificity of the question. "About a week ago. It's small, almost like a breathing hole," Thompson finished, reaching for an otoscope. "Hold still, please." The examination was thorough and silent. Thompson occasionally made notes but asked no further questions until he had completed his assessment. "I'm going to press gently here," he finally said, placing his thumb and forefinger on opposite sides of the swelling. "Tell me what you feel." The pressure sent a wave of nausea through Ashley as something inside reacted, squirming away from the compression. She gasped, gripping the examination table. "It moved," she whispered. "You must have felt that." For the first time, Thompson's professional mask slipped, revealing something like grim recognition. "I did," he said, removing his gloves slowly. His gaze was now fixed on Ashley with new intensity. "Dr. Collins, I believe you have subcutaneous myitis, specifically from the human botfly, Dermatobia hominis." The clinical terminology was like a life raft in a stormy sea, something solid Ashley could grasp. "Botfly larvae," she breathed, medical knowledge rushing back. "But they typically present with a more visible breathing hole, and the movement isn't usually this pronounced unless there are multiple larvae or they've been developing for longer than usual." "Or they've burrowed deeper than typical," Thompson completed her thought. "We need imaging immediately." Within an hour, Ashley was lying inside an MRI machine, the rhythmic thumping providing a bizarre counterpoint to the irregular movements beneath her scalp. When the scan was complete, Thompson showed her the images with the grim determination of someone delivering bad news. "It's worse than I initially thought," he said, pointing to several distinct shapes nestled in the tissue between her scalp and skull. "There appear to be multiple larvae, and they've burrowed deeper than is typical. One appears to be approaching the meningeal layer." Ashley stared at the scan, medical detachment briefly overriding personal horror. "That's not normal botfly behavior." "No," Thompson agreed, his voice dropping slightly. "It's not." He hesitated, then added, "I've seen this once before. My colleague contracted something similar during research in Venezuela 15 years ago. The presentation was almost identical." Ashley looked up sharply. "What happened?" Thompson's expression darkened. "We need to admit you immediately, Dr. Collins. This is going to require specialized intervention." It wasn't an answer, but it told Ashley everything she needed to know. "The human botfly typically follows a predictable life cycle," Dr. Thompson explained as Ashley sat in the hospital bed, for delivering antibiotics into her arm. The private room in Massachusetts General's tropical medicine ward was quiet except for the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. The female botfly captures a mosquito or tick, attaches her eggs to it, and when that carrier lands on a human host, body heat triggers the eggs to hatch. The larvae then burrow into the skin. Ashley nodded mechanically. The clinical explanation provided a thin veneer of distance from her situation. She could almost pretend they were discussing someone else's case. "Normally," Thompson continued, "the larvae create a breathing hole and develop over 6 to 8 weeks before emerging to pupate. They're usually solitary, and they don't typically burrow as deeply as yours have." He paused, studying the latest scans displayed on his tablet. "This level of infestation suggests multiple egg-laying events, possibly from different flies." "That doesn't make sense," Ashley said, wincing as another movement sent pain shooting through her skull. The exposure window was limited to a single night. Thompson's expression grew troubled. "That's what concerns me. The pattern is unusual." The door opened and Dr. Sofia Reyes, the hospital's leading parasitologist, entered carrying additional imaging results. Her crisp white coat and confident stride provided a reassuring presence in the increasingly frightening situation. "I've reviewed the MRIs," she announced without preamble. "I count at least 7 distinct larvae in various stages of development. The largest is approximately 1 centimeter long, which suggests it's been developing for about 3 weeks. She placed the images on the rolling table between them. The concerning issue is their proximity to the cranial vault. Ashley stared at the images, her medical training allowing her to see exactly what Reyes was indicating. One of the larvae had positioned itself dangerously close to the thin bone protecting her brain. "What are our options?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The two specialists exchanged glances before Thompson spoke. Traditionally, there are several approaches. The most conservative is occlusion therapy, covering the breathing holes with petroleum jelly to force the larvae to emerge for air, then extracting them. There are also oral ivermectin protocols that can kill the larvae, though that creates the risk of inflammatory response to the dead parasites. And surgical extraction. Ashley finished, already seeing where this was heading. Dr. Reyes nodded grimly. Given the depth and position of several specimens, particularly the one near the meningeal layer, surgical intervention may be necessary. The room fell silent as the full implications settled over Ashley. Brain surgery because she'd removed a mosquito net against the advice of an indigenous healer. "I'd like to try occlusion therapy first on the more superficial sites," Thompson suggested. "For the deeper specimens, we'll need to consult neurosurgery." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of discomfort and clinical procedures. The medical team applied thick petroleum jelly to the breathing holes they could identify, covering them with occlusive dressings. 2 larvae were successfully extracted this way, squirming, cream-colored creatures with rows of backward-facing spines that explained the searing pain Ashley felt whenever they moved. Each extraction left a small crater-like wound that was cleaned, treated with antibiotics, and bandaged. But the deeper larvae remained unaffected. "They're too far from the surface," Dr. Reyes explained during morning rounds. "The occlusion method won't reach them." Ashley's condition was deteriorating. The area of swelling had expanded, and she now experienced periods of dizziness and nausea that concerned the medical team. A spinal tap revealed elevated white blood cell counts, suggesting her body was mounting an increasingly aggressive immune response. "We need to consider more invasive options," Thompson said, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of genuine worry. "The inflammation is creating pressure, and if that continues to increase—" "I know," Ashley interrupted, not needing to hear the potentially catastrophic outcomes. As a doctor, she understood all too well what increased intracranial pressure could mean. "Call neurosurgery." That afternoon, Dr. Jonathan Liu, the hospital's chief neurosurgeon, examined Ashley and reviewed her case. His assessment was blunt. "The larvae nearest the meningeal layer has moved again, closer to the dural venous sinus," he reported. "If it ruptures either structure, we could be looking at severe hemorrhage or infection of the central nervous system. We need to operate within the next 24 hours." The gravity of the situation finally broke through Ashley's professional detachment. "Could I die from this?" she asked, voicing the question that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness. Dr. Liu hesitated, then gave her the courtesy of his honesty. "Yes. Without intervention, this could be fatal. With surgery, the risks are still significant but considerably lower." Ashley closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was a doctor, someone who helped others navigate medical crises, not the patient facing life-threatening complications from a tropical parasite. "I need to call someone," she said quietly. When the doctors left, Ashley reached for her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in years. "Dad." Robert Collins answered on the third ring, his voice exactly as she remembered, deep, slightly distracted, as if his mind was perpetually split between the conversation at hand and some complex medical puzzle. "Ashley, is everything all right?" The simple question broke something inside her. Tears came in a sudden flood, and Ashley found herself struggling to speak through them. "No," she managed finally. "I'm in trouble, Dad. I'm at Mass General. I picked up something in the Amazon, Botfly larvae in my scalp. They're near my brain and I need surgery and I'm scared and I didn't know who else to call who would understand the medical side of this and—" "I'm coming," he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp with focus. "I'm in New York for a conference. I can be there in 4 hours. Don't let them operate until I arrive." The decisiveness in his tone was so familiar, so reminiscent of her childhood when he would sweep in and fix impossible problems before disappearing again. Ashley felt a complex wave of relief and resentment. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning," she said. "I'll be there tonight." "Hold on." True to his word, Robert Collins arrived at Massachusetts General just after 9 p.m., still wearing the suit he'd had on at his conference. Despite being in his mid-60s, he moved with the energy of a much younger man as he navigated the hospital corridors to Ashley's room. Seeing him in the doorway, Ashley was struck by how much older he looked than her memories. His hair was now completely silver, deep lines etched around his eyes, his tall frame slightly stooped. But his eyes were the same, piercing blue and intensely focused. "Let me see the scans," were his first words, even before hello. Ashley pointed to the tablet on her bedside table. "They're all there. Dr. Thompson gave me access." Robert picked up the device and began swiping through images with practiced efficiency, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Who's doing the surgery?" he asked without looking up. "Dr. Jonathan Liu. He's the chief of neurosurgery here." Robert nodded approvingly. "He's good. I've read his work on parasitic infections affecting the central nervous system." He set down the tablet and finally looked directly at Ashley. "How are you feeling?" The simple question, delivered with unexpected gentleness, caught Ashley off guard. "Scared," she admitted. "And stupid. I took off the mosquito netting because I was hot." A ghost of a smile touched Robert's lips. "That sounds familiar. I once contracted leishmaniasis because I didn't reapply insect repellent after swimming in a river in Peru." He moved closer to the bed, hesitantly taking the visitor's chair. "The difference is, I was alone. You've got an entire hospital of experts, plus your old man." Ashley studied him, trying to reconcile this present version with her memories of the father who had chosen research over family. "Why did you come? We haven't spoken in 3 years?" Robert's gaze dropped to his hands. "Because you called," he said simply. "And because I've missed too much already." Before Ashley could respond, the door opened and Dr. Thompson entered. He stopped short at the sight of Robert. "Dr. Collins," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I wasn't aware you were consulting on this case." "I'm not here as a consultant," Robert replied, standing to shake Thompson's hand. "I'm here as Ashley's father." Recognition dawned on Thompson's face. "Of course. The resemblance is clear now." He glanced between them. "I followed your work on tropical parasitic infections, Dr. Collins. Your research on myitis complications was groundbreaking." "That's why I called him," Ashley interjected. "Dad specializes in precisely what's happening to me." The conversation quickly turned technical as the two specialists discussed Ashley's case, debating treatment approaches and surgical techniques. Ashley watched them, feeling simultaneously reassured by their expertise and unsettled by the clinical way they discussed the creatures invading her body. "I'd like to suggest an adjunct to the surgical plan," Robert said eventually. "Before removing the larvae, I recommend a high-dose ivermectin treatment to immobilize them. It reduces the risk of movement during extraction, which could be catastrophic if the deepest specimen is disturbed." Thompson considered this, then nodded. "That's reasonable. I'll discuss it with Dr. Liu." After Thompson left, a heavy silence fell between Ashley and her father. 20 years of estrangement couldn't be bridged in a single evening, especially under such circumstances. Yet his presence provided a strange comfort, the sense that someone who truly understood both the medical situation and Ashley herself was now involved. "You should get some rest," Robert said finally. "I'll be here all night." "You don't have to stay," Ashley began, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. "I do," he said firmly. "I've left too many times before." Morning brought a flurry of preoperative activity. Dr. Liu arrived with his surgical team to explain the procedure in detail, his manner calm and methodical. "We'll perform a minimally invasive craniotomy," he explained, using a model skull to demonstrate. "Based on the most recent scans, we've identified 3 distinct areas where the larvae must be extracted. The procedure should take approximately 4 hours." Robert, who had indeed remained in Ashley's room all night, asked precise technical questions about the approach to each extraction site. His interventions had already altered the surgical plan. The team had administered ivermectin as he suggested, and they would be using a specialized microsurgical technique he had helped develop for parasitic extractions near delicate neural structures. As orderlies arrived to transport Ashley to pre-op, she found herself reaching for her father's hand. "Will you be there?" she asked, suddenly feeling like a child again. Robert squeezed her fingers. "I'll be observing in the gallery, and I've been granted consulting privileges so I can advise if needed." His voice softened. "You're going to be fine, Ashley. This is what Lou does best." As they wheeled her away, Ashley caught a last glimpse of her father's face, a mixture of professional confidence and parental fear that told her more about his feelings than any words could have conveyed. The surgery itself was a complex dance between precision and urgency. From the observation gallery above, Robert watched with the conflicted emotions of a father and a specialist, clinical interest in the rare case before him warring with parental terror that the patient was his daughter. Dr. Lou and his team worked with meticulous care, using specialized instruments to extract each larvae without damaging the surrounding neural tissue. The deepest specimen, the one that had migrated dangerously close to the dural venous sinus, proved to be the most challenging. As Lou carefully maneuvered his instruments around the delicate structures protecting Ashley's brain, the larvae responded with violent movements that sent ripples of tension through the operating room. At one point, it appeared the creature might rupture the thin membrane separating it from Ashley's brain tissue. "Steady pressure," Lou murmured to his assistant, his hands rock-steady despite the crisis unfolding on the microscopic level. "We need to extract it intact." From the gallery, Robert found himself holding his breath as the surgeon worked to remove the final parasite. When Lou finally lifted the intact larvae free and announced, "All specimens extracted successfully," Robert felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. The surgery had taken 6 hours instead of the projected 4, but all 7 larvae had been removed without apparent damage to Ashley's brain. As she was transferred to the intensive care unit, Robert accompanied her, unwilling to leave her side even for a moment. Recovery was gradual but steady. Ashley regained consciousness 2 days after surgery, her first words asking for her father. The neurological assessments showed no significant impairment, though she would need physical therapy to regain full strength on her right side, where some minor nerve irritation had occurred during the extraction process. "The specimens have been sent to the CDC," Dr. Thompson explained during her first post-operative consultation. "Preliminary analysis confirms they were indeed Dermatobia hominis, but with some unusual genetic markers. The researchers are calling it a previously undocumented subspecies." Ashley touched the bandaged area where her scalp had been opened. So Isabella was right. This wasn't ordinary Botfly behavior. "It appears your indigenous healer understood something about these organisms that medical science is only beginning to recognize," Thompson agreed. "The traditional knowledge often contains insights that complement our modern understanding." As Ashley's strength returned over the following weeks, she found herself engaging in deeper conversations with her father than they'd had since her childhood. The crisis had stripped away years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding, leaving behind the fundamental connection between parent and child. "I want to go back," Ashley announced one afternoon as Robert helped her with physical therapy exercises. "To the Amazon?" he asked, surprised. "To Isabella. To learn more about what she knows. Not as a skeptical Western physician, but as someone who understands there's wisdom in traditional approaches that we've been too arrogant to recognize." Robert smiled, seeing something in his daughter's eyes that reminded him of his own early passion for discovery. "That sounds like the beginning of something important." 6 months later, Ashley stood in the ceremonial space of her newly established Center for Integrative Tropical Medicine at Boston Medical Center. The facility represented a radical departure from traditional medical practice, a place where indigenous knowledge and cutting-edge science worked together to provide comprehensive care for patients with tropical diseases. Isabella had traveled from the Amazon to attend the opening ceremony, bringing with her several apprentices eager to share their traditional knowledge with Western practitioners. The collaboration that began with Ashley's near-death experience had blossomed into a formal partnership between the indigenous community and the medical establishment. "The forest teaches harsh lessons," Isabella said during her blessing of the new center, "but it also provides the cures for those wise enough to listen." Ashley nodded, touching the small scar behind her ear that served as a permanent reminder of her journey. The mark was barely visible now, but it carried immense significance, not just as evidence of her ordeal, but as a symbol of the humility she had gained and the bridges she had built between different ways of knowing. The center's first patient was an 8-year-old girl who had recently returned from Colombia with symptoms remarkably similar to Ashley's own case. But this time, the medical team was prepared. They had protocols in place, combining traditional plant-based treatments with modern surgical techniques. The child recovered completely within a week. As Ashley watched the little girl reunite with her grateful parents, she felt a profound sense of completion. Emma Rodriguez's death had set her on a path that nearly cost her own life, but ultimately led to something far greater than personal redemption. It had led to a new way of healing that honored both ancient wisdom and modern science. Her father, now serving as the center's director of research, joined her as they watched the family leave. "She's the same age Emma was," he observed quietly. "Except this time we saved her," Ashley replied, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. The work they were doing at the center was already gaining international attention. Medical schools were sending students to learn about integrative approaches to tropical medicine. Indigenous communities from around the world were sharing their knowledge with researchers who approached them as partners rather than subjects of study. But perhaps most importantly for Ashley, the center had given her a way to honor both the child she had failed to save and the ancient healer who had ultimately saved her. In bridging the gap between traditional and modern medicine, she had found her true calling. As the sun set over Boston, casting long shadows through the center's windows, Ashley reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The terrifying night when she felt something moving beneath her skin had been the beginning of a transformation that went far deeper than the physical healing of her body. She had learned to listen, really listen, to wisdom that existed long before medical schools and research journals. She had learned to see healing as something that involved not just the body, but the spirit as well. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the most profound insights come not from what we know, but from acknowledging what we don't know. The parasites that had nearly killed her had, in a strange way, given her new life. They had forced her to confront her own arrogance, reconnect with her father, and discover a path forward that honored both science and tradition. Looking back now, Ashley understood that Isabella's warning about the night spirits hadn't been mere superstition. In the language of her people, the elder had been describing a very real biological threat, one that required not just medical intervention, but respect for the complex relationships between humans and the natural world. The forest had indeed given back what it took. It had taken Ashley's certainty, her pride, and nearly her life. But in return, it had given her wisdom, humility, and a purpose that extended far beyond her individual career. As she locked up the center for the night, Ashley smiled at the thought of Isabella, thousands of miles away in the Amazon, probably knowing somehow that her teachings had taken root in the most unlikely of places, a sterile medical facility in one of America's most prestigious hospitals. The Indigenous healer had planted seeds of wisdom in Ashley's mind during those 3 days they spent together. It had taken a life-threatening crisis for those seeds to sprout, but now they were growing into something that would benefit countless patients for generations to come. The following months brought a steady stream of cases to the center, travelers returning from tropical regions with mysterious illnesses that had stumped conventional medicine, indigenous patients seeking treatment that respected their cultural beliefs, and researchers eager to document traditional healing practices before they were lost to modernization. Each case taught Ashley something new about the delicate balance between different approaches to healing. She learned to read not just test results and imaging studies, but also the stories patients told about their experiences, the dreams that troubled them, and the cultural contexts that shaped their understanding of illness. One particularly challenging case involved a marine biologist who had contracted a rare fungal infection while studying coral reefs in the Philippines. Traditional antifungal medications had failed, and the infection was slowly spreading through his respiratory system. Working with a traditional healer from the region via video conference, Ashley's team learned about a specific combination of seaweed extracts that had been used for centuries to treat similar conditions. Laboratory analysis revealed that the traditional remedy contained compounds that worked synergistically with modern antifungals in ways that neither treatment could achieve alone. The patient made a complete recovery, and the discovery led to a new protocol that was subsequently adopted by tropical medicine centers around the world. Stories like this became commonplace at Ashley's center, but they never lost their power to amaze her. Each successful integration of traditional and modern approaches felt like a small victory over the arrogance that had once nearly cost her everything. Her relationship with her father had also continued to evolve. Robert had taken early retirement from his position in New York to work full-time at the center, finally finding a way to channel his expertise into something that brought him closer to his daughter rather than driving them apart. They worked well together, their different perspectives complementing each other in ways that benefited both their research and their patients. Robert's encyclopedic knowledge of tropical pathogens combined with Ashley's growing understanding of traditional healing created a unique approach that drew visitors from medical institutions worldwide. One evening, as they reviewed cases together in Ashley's office, Robert brought up a subject they had carefully avoided for months. "I found something in your mother's papers," he said quietly, producing a worn envelope from his briefcase. "Letters she wrote but never sent. They're addressed to you." Ashley's breath caught. Her mother had died when she was 15, leaving behind a void that had never quite been filled. "Why are you showing me these now?" "Because they explain things I could never find the words for," Robert replied, his voice heavy with old grief. "About why I left, about what your mother wanted for you, about the guilt I carried for not being the father either of you deserved." With trembling hands, Ashley opened the first letter, dated just a month before her mother's death. The handwritten pages revealed her mother's hopes for Ashley's future, her pride in her daughter's academic achievements, and her understanding of why Robert threw himself so completely into his work. "He's running from the pain of watching me die," one passage read. "But he's also trying to save other families from what we're going through. Don't judge him too harshly for choosing to fight death in the only way he knows how, even if it means he can't be present for the death happening in his own home." Through tears, Ashley read letter after letter, each one revealing new layers of her parents' relationship and her mother's wisdom about love, loss, and forgiveness. The final letter, written just days before she died, contained a request that stopped Ashley's heart. "If something happens to me," her mother had written, "please don't let my death drive you and your father apart. You're both healers in your own ways, and the world needs what you have to offer. Find a way to work together. Find a way to forgive each other. Find a way to honor the love that brought you both into existence." Father and daughter sat in silence for a long time after Ashley finished reading. The letters had answered questions that had haunted both of them for decades, providing closure that neither had expected to find. "She would have been proud of what you've built here," Robert said finally. "What we've built," Ashley corrected. "She would have been proud of both of us finally figuring out how to be a family again." As the center's reputation grew, Ashley began receiving invitations to speak at medical conferences around the world. Her presentations about integrative approaches to tropical medicine were met with enthusiasm from some quarters and skepticism from others, but they consistently sparked important conversations about the future of healthcare. During one particularly memorable conference in Geneva, Ashley found herself on a panel with several other physicians who had experienced paradigm shifts in their medical practice. The moderator asked each panelist to describe the moment when their worldview changed. "I was lying on an operating table," Ashley began, "with 7 botfly larvae eating their way toward my brain, because I had been too proud to listen to an indigenous healer who tried to warn me about the dangers I was courting." She paused, letting the shocking image settle over the audience. "That's when I learned that all the medical degrees in the world don't make you wise if you're not humble enough to learn from those who've been practicing healing for thousands of years." The response was electric. During the question and answer session, physician after physician stood up to share their own stories of encountering traditional knowledge that had challenged their preconceptions. By the end of the panel, there was widespread agreement that medical education needed to include more exposure to traditional healing practices. Ashley's presentation was later published in several medical journals and became required reading at numerous medical schools. But perhaps more importantly, it inspired other physicians to seek out indigenous healers and traditional practitioners in their own regions, creating a growing network of integrative medicine pioneers. Back in Boston, the center continued to expand. They added a traditional medicine garden where indigenous plants were grown for both research and treatment purposes. They established exchange programs that allowed medical students to spend time with traditional healers in various parts of the world. They created protocols for documenting traditional knowledge in ways that respected indigenous intellectual property rights while making the information available to benefit global health. Isabella visited twice more, each time bringing new healers and new knowledge to share. During her final visit, when she was nearly 80 years old, she pulled Ashley aside for a private conversation. "The forest spirits told me you would understand eventually," she said, her weathered hands clasping Ashley's. "Not the first lesson. You were too angry then, too full of your own importance. But the second lesson, the one that came with great pain, that one you learned well." Ashley smiled, remembering her younger self's dismissive attitude toward indigenous wisdom. "I'm still learning." Every day. Good, Isabella nodded approvingly. The moment you stop learning is the moment you become dangerous again. Healing is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing when you don't know, and being humble enough to ask for help. As Isabella prepared to return to the Amazon for the final time, she was too old now for such long journeys. She performed one last ceremony at the center. Standing in the medicine garden surrounded by plants from around the world, she offered blessings for all the healers, traditional and modern, who would carry on the work of bridging different knowledge systems. The forest gives and takes, she said in closing, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd of doctors, researchers, and traditional healers. Dr. Ashley learned this truth in the hardest way possible. Now she teaches it to others so they might learn it more gently. This is how wisdom grows, from pain to understanding to compassion for others who have not yet understood. After Isabella's departure, Ashley threw herself into writing a book about her experiences and the lessons she had learned about integrative medicine. The manuscript, titled When the Forest Calls, A Doctor's Journey from Arrogance to Humility, became both a medical memoir and a call to action for healthcare providers around the world. The book's success led to more speaking engagements, more research opportunities, and more chances to advocate for the inclusion of traditional knowledge in modern healthcare systems. But it also brought something Ashley hadn't expected: letters from patients and families whose lives had been touched by similar experiences. One letter that particularly moved her came from the parents of a young boy who had contracted a rare neurological condition while traveling in Southeast Asia. Traditional treatments had failed, and the family was facing the possibility of permanent disability. After reading Ashley's book, they sought out a traditional healer who suggested a plant-based treatment that, when combined with conventional therapy, led to their son's complete recovery. "You taught us that healing comes in many forms," the mother wrote. "By sharing your story, you gave us permission to look beyond what our doctors in America were telling us. You saved our son's life by teaching us to be humble enough to seek wisdom wherever it could be found." Letters like this arrived almost daily, each one reinforcing Ashley's conviction that her near-death experience had been transformed into something that served a purpose far greater than her individual survival. 5 years after the opening of her center, Ashley received an invitation that brought her full circle. The World Health Organization was hosting a conference on traditional medicine in Geneva, and they wanted her to deliver the keynote address. The theme of the conference was Bridging Ancient Wisdom and Modern Science, and Ashley's work had become a model for how such integration could be achieved. Standing at the podium before an audience of health officials, researchers, and traditional healers from around the world, Ashley felt the weight of responsibility that came with her platform. These were the people who would shape global health policy for decades to come. What she said here could influence how traditional knowledge was valued and incorporated into healthcare systems worldwide. 5 years ago, she began, I was a doctor who believed that medical school had taught me everything I needed to know about healing. I was wrong in ways that nearly cost me my life and definitely cost me years of meaningful connection with my father and the potential to help countless patients more effectively. She went on to describe her journey from arrogance to humility, from dismissing traditional knowledge to embracing it as an essential component of comprehensive healthcare. She talked about the patients who had been helped by integrative approaches, the research breakthroughs that had come from studying traditional remedies, and the relationships that had been built between indigenous communities and medical institutions. But perhaps most importantly, she talked about what the medical profession could learn from traditional healers about the art of healing, the importance of seeing patients as whole human beings rather than collections of symptoms, the value of addressing spiritual and emotional needs alongside physical ailments, and the wisdom of understanding illness within the context of a person's entire life experience. We in modern medicine have become very good at fighting disease, Ashley concluded. But we have sometimes forgotten how to promote healing. Traditional healers have never forgotten this distinction. They understand that true healing involves not just the body, but the mind and spirit as well. This is not mysticism, it's a more complete understanding of what it means to be human. The response to her keynote was overwhelming. Health ministers from several countries approached her afterward to discuss how they might implement integrative medicine programs in their own healthcare systems. Research institutions offered funding for studies examining traditional healing practices. Medical schools inquired about curriculum development that would expose students to indigenous knowledge. But the response that mattered most to Ashley came from a group of traditional healers who had attended the conference. An elderly woman from Kenya, speaking through a translator, told Ashley that she had been worried that traditional knowledge would die out as young people in her community moved to cities and adopted Western ways. "But now I see that there are doctors like you who understand the value of what we know," the healer said. "You are helping to build bridges so that our wisdom will not be lost. You are ensuring that future generations will benefit from both old knowledge and new knowledge working together." As Ashley flew back to Boston, she reflected on how far she had come from that terrifying night when she first felt something moving beneath her skin. The parasites that had nearly killed her had instead led her to a deeper understanding of healing, a reconciled relationship with her father, and a purpose that extended far beyond her individual medical practice. Looking out the airplane window at the landscape passing below, Ashley thought about all the traditional healers around the world who were working to preserve ancient knowledge while adapting to modern realities. She thought about the medical students who were learning to approach healing with both scientific rigor and cultural humility. She thought about the patients who were benefiting from treatments that honored both traditional wisdom and modern innovation. Most of all, she thought about Emma Rodriguez, the 7-year-old patient whose death had started her on this journey. Emma would be 12 now if she had lived. Ashley couldn't bring her back, but she could honor her memory by ensuring that other children facing similar illnesses would have access to the full spectrum of healing knowledge available to humanity. The plane touched down in Boston as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Ashley of sunsets over the Amazon rainforest. As she made her way through the familiar corridors of the airport, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for surviving her ordeal, but for the transformation it had made possible. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "How did the speech go?" he asked. "I think Mom would have been proud," Ashley replied, knowing that he would understand exactly what she meant. The next morning, Ashley arrived at the center to find a new patient waiting, a young woman who had recently returned from a research expedition in Madagascar with symptoms that were puzzling conventional physicians. As Ashley reviewed the case file, she smiled at the familiar pattern of tropical exposure, unusual symptoms, and medical uncertainty that had become her specialty. But now, instead of approaching such cases with the arrogance of Western medical certainty, she began with humility and openness to multiple possibilities. Her first call was not to a specialist at another hospital, but to a traditional healer in Madagascar who might have encountered similar cases. This was how healing worked best, Ashley had learned, not through the dominance of one knowledge system over another, but through the respectful integration of all available wisdom in service of the patient's well-being. As she prepared to examine her new patient, Ashley touched the small scar behind her ear, silently thanking the parasites that had nearly destroyed her for ultimately teaching her how to become a better healer. The forest had indeed given back what it took, transforming terror into wisdom, isolation into connection, and pride into the kind of humility that made true healing possible. And in that moment, surrounded by the tools of both modern medicine and traditional healing, Ashley knew that her journey was far from over. There were still patients to heal, knowledge to bridge, and relationships to build between the ancient wisdom of indigenous peoples and the evolving understanding of modern science. The work would continue, one patient at a time, one bridge at a time, one lesson in humility at a time. And somewhere in the Amazon rainforest, Isabella's apprentices were learning the traditional ways while also understanding that their knowledge had value far beyond their own communities, that it could help heal not just individuals, but the broken relationship between humanity and the natural world. This was Ashley's legacy, not the destruction that had nearly claimed her life, but the healing that had grown from that destruction, reaching out to touch countless other lives in ways she was still discovering. The forest had taught her its harshest lesson, but in learning it, she had become part of something much larger than herself, a growing movement toward more complete, more humble, more effective healing for all humanity. The story that began with terror in the dark hours of a Boston morning had become a story of hope, transformation, and the endless possibility for growth that exists when we remain open to learning from the wisdom of others. And as Ashley began her examination of her new patient, she carried with her not just the tools of modern medicine, but the deeper understanding that true healing requires both scientific knowledge and the humility to recognize that there is always more to learn. The parasites were gone, but their greatest gift remained, the knowledge that healing is not about having all the answers, but about having the courage to keep asking questions, the humility to learn from others, and the compassion to see each patient as a whole human being deserving of the very best that all healing traditions have to offer. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. Remember to share your thoughts about Ashley's incredible journey in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if this story opened your eyes to the powerful intersection between traditional wisdom and modern medicine. Sometimes the most profound healing comes not from what we know, but from what we're humble enough to learn from others. Until next time, stay curious, stay humble, and never underestimate the wisdom that exists in traditions far older than our textbooks.